Okay, I'm going to do a short video on the final project idea and the sponsor identification. And I'm hoping this is just kind of supplemental to the reading and helps clarify a few points. One of the things is that it should be like an abstract in a sense, maybe written in that same form, but obviously it doesn't need to be as detailed. Like, I think one of the things that'll happen is you'll use this initial idea, and then at the end of the semester, you'll develop your abstract, and it'll really be sort of revising and modifying the initial project idea, and sort of revising it. So it will be kind of like part of your project right now and help kind of frame it. But it obviously doesn't need to be quite as detailed at this point. I know most of you are still feeling things out and thinking through things. Some of you, it might even be, you might have multiple project ideas that you're thinking about. And then maybe when you get into the needs statement, you start to look at, the research and different things, and then you decide one project might be more feasible than another. And so I've had a number of students in the past who've maybe put forth a few different ideas, but then kind of whittled things down and looked at what would be more feasible. One of the things that I like to mention is that you really should be thinking about projects. And I think some people in the past have looked at grants kind of like from the standpoint of, if I had a lot of money, if there was some money available, what would I do with that money? And I would kind of want you to kind of rethink that approach a bit. So, for example, they might think, well, I'd want to, purchase some technology, or computers would be really helpful for this organization I work with or something. But generally, I mean, I can say confidently that most funders are not going to fund something like that. And really what funders are looking for is like that project, some people in the community or in an area that understand an issue and have this really great project idea, have a really clear vision for how to accomplish that project, and that's kind of what they're generally speaking looking to fund. So it should be really like a project idea, and something that involves different components that are going to fit into the grant, like the goals and objectives of the project, the the management plan, the needs, the research on the issue, those kind of things. One of the things I wanted to mention is kind of, too, for this idea is to kind of keep it manageable. I don't know how to explain that, entirely. I would say that generally speaking, again, federal grants like the Department of Education, Veterans Administration, Department of Justice, those are going to be really, really involved grants. I've reviewed grants for those agencies, and I've written grants for those agencies. Department of Ed grants that I generally read tend to be around 200 to 300 pages. The Department of Justice grant, the last one that I submitted for the Office for Violence Against Women, that grant was, I think, around 250 to maybe to 300 pages. So those are very involved. I really, really recommend sort of looking at a local foundation and a kind of smaller grant. But one of the things you could do, or that might be really helpful, would be to develop a project idea that would maybe set you up for one of those larger grants down the road. And so one example of that would be like doing some research. So the other day at a local middle school, for example, I met with a group of people who were, they've received a $40,000 grant from the state to do some research and look at nutrition of young women in the area, and then the connection between that and academic performance and grades. But their ultimate goal is to actually set them up for a larger grant proposal, to do the research, get the initial data collection, and then to set them up for that larger grant. So that's something too that some of you might look at or kind of consider is, if you have a really large area, maybe kind of trying to narrow it down, collect some initial data, and that might set you up for something larger down the road. So, and I would say, again, to all these things, there's some kind of caveats. I mean, if you have a lot of experience already and you're interested in doing a federal grant, I would, I'd do my my best to try to help and support you. The other thing is that there are some exceptions, like the National Endowment for the Humanities sometimes has some smaller programs. If any of you are interested in art programs, so there are some different, some smaller programs for federal grants that are available, but by and large, generally they're much more involved, larger grants. I highly recommend, if most of you, if you can work with some type of nonprofit, but of course too, also, Ball State is a nonprofit, institution. So you have, many different options, I think, but generally working with an organization can be really helpful. And sometimes meeting and talking with them can kind of help you, because, they can maybe give you some feedback on grants they've received in the past, projects they've done, and then what maybe they're looking at or what would be helpful for them. Another key thing I think that's helpful is salary, to know about salary. Almost all foundations, which is probably more what you should be looking at, other than federal grants, foundation grants are really probably more appropriate for this class. So, and I tend to suggest things like the Ball Brothers Foundation, the Community Foundation, if you're local, if you're in Indiana and in the Muncie area, those are good foundations to look at. Some of you might have really specific ones for the issue you're looking at. If you're looking at, like for example, that nutrition grant that I saw the other day, there's actually a state organization that they got the grant from that was set up around that issue. So sometimes they're very specific, but generally speaking, some of the local foundations can be really helpful. And what I would do is all their websites, the foundation, the Community Foundation, Ball Brothers Foundations, and others, have a section of their website around grants that tell you projects they've funded in the past and what they're interested in funding. And so for the sponsor identification, it's really important to look at some of the websites, look at what they funded, kind of what their mission is, what they're interested in promoting. For example, like right now, the Ball Brothers Foundation is putting limits on some of the education grants. I think they're looking at early childhood, but limiting to that area in terms of education. So that's like, it's really important to kind of, look and have an idea of what they will and will not fund. And then I'm not sure I covered this already, but salary is something that generally foundations do not cover. And that's really important to know. So, and that's because salaries get really complicated. It's hard to maintain salaries. And then you get into like legal requirements around, well, it opens up a bunch of legal issues when you are paying somebody, but then you have retirement, health benefits, all these other issues that become complicated. So almost all, foundation grants put limitations on salaries, will not cover salaries. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this gives you some idea. If you have more questions, please let me know. I would love to try to cover them and address them. So again, I hope this is kind of helpful.